and thank you for joining today's edition of the Signal Media webinar series. I'm Howard Wahlberg, correspondent for AFCEA International's Signal Media. The value of achieving continuous ATO, cATO, is well known at this point. What is less well known, however, are implementation details, specifically what categories of tools make it effective. During today's webinar, generously sponsored by Security Compass, we will discuss the key concepts and components of cATO architecture and walk through a use case of how the implementation works. Security Compass was founded in 2004 and began with a team of experienced penetration testers. Today, they have come far and work with many large enterprises globally to manage their cybersecurity risk through balanced development automation. They have three key offerings. Their flagship product, SD Elements, enables organizations to deliver software quickly and reduce cost through automation. Their modular role-based e-learning solutions empower organizations to embrace DevSecOps, and their strategic advisory services offer expertise in cloud security, pen testing, and red teaming for a better security posture. Joining me to guide us during today's discussion will be Altaz Villani, Director of Insights Research at Security Compass. He conducts ongoing research in the software security domain. Prior to joining Security Compass, he was a Senior Research Director and Executive Advisor at Infotech Research Group, providing trusted advice around application development, application rationalization, Agile, cloud, mobile, and the SDLC. Other past positions include Senior Manager at KPMG and other positions working alongside senior stakeholders to drive business value through software development. Altaz is currently Vice Chair of the Open Group Security Forum, a member of the Safe Code Technical Leadership and CIO of Strategy Councils, and also sits on several IEEE working groups where DevSecOps and privacy challenges are being tabled at the international standards level. Hassan Yassar is the Technical Director of Continuous Deployment of Capability Group in the Software Engineering Institute at Carnegie Mellon University. Hassan leads an engineering group to enable, accelerate, and assure transformation at the speed of relevance by leveraging DevSecOps, Agile, Lean AI ML, and other emerging technologies to create a smart software platform pipeline. Hassan has more than 25 years of experience as a senior security engineer, software architect, and manager in all phases of secure software development and the information modeling process. He is also the adjunct faculty member in CMU's Heinz College and Institute of Software Research, where he currently teaches software and security and DevOps engineering for deployment and operations. As always, please feel free to submit questions at any time during this discussion by using the Ask a Question box on your webinar console. We're going to have plenty of time for your questions throughout this discussion with our panel. Please also note that we have some resources available for you to download at your convenience. Just click on the Resources tab. With that, I will turn it over to Altaz, who will open our discussion on continuous ATO. Altaz?
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity. And thanks, everybody, for coming here and listening to what we have to say around continuous ATO. And I think as we talk about continuous ATO, it's important to, first of all, realize what do we mean when we say architecture? So I think it's important to, first of all, distinguish that the role of an architect is to make sure that we're addressing a particular need from a business or from an agency perspective. And we're trying to ensure that we're using technology to map according to those needs. So let me pause there, and I'd like to ask you, Hassan, as well, your thoughts from an architecture perspective, as you've had discussions with folks in the federal space and in the DoD space. When we talk about architecture, is that a similar idea about the alignment between the business need and the technology? It's important for us to kind of get this squared off, I think, initially from a definition perspective.
First of all, thank you, Altaz, for giving an opportunity as well. It's glad to be part of another discussion with you and under the FC umbrella. So when we look at architecture, it's actually the very related to the business aspect of it, because that's a foundational, if you look at the ATO perspective, it's a foundational concept of looking for the business needs and find out what risks elements are and carry out the risk elements so we can develop and deliver the secure capabilities. That's kind of a foundation of this. How are we achieving that? That's a question. Like, how are we achieving, how we are tying into the business, how we are tying into the security elements, how we are getting down through the software delivery environment. We are failing. We have to say that we are failing right now. That's the reason, like, we are talking today, how can we architect those?
Yeah.
Because we often look at the security elements after the fact. We often look at either spending more money and more time looking for some security findings or static analysis, other things. But we never really see what is the balance out of it, how much we can carry out to the business relevance, which we can discuss today, because we don't know how to implement it, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
We don't know how to really carry out the life cycle. We don't know how can we connect the dots. It looks like are, but sometimes we are expecting everything to the tool perspective. Sometimes we are enforcing so much policies. Sometimes we have a lack of people's, like educational aspect of it. There are a lot of reasons we can discuss today. Overall, we don't have a good implementation on this. I'm hoping that as the continuous AT or ATO community, which is this community, will help to guide the organization, enterprise to implement in a successful way, to implement a useful way, to implement the right direction. We can really tie the requirements with the business needs, with the security consultants.
Yeah. So I think from the purposes of this discussion today, I'd really like us to take kind of three stages. Let's start by first of all talking about key concepts about continuous ATO. I think having an understanding of that framework is important. How does that tie into risk? And then we'll flip the discussion and start to talk about a continuous ATO architecture. And then what we'll do is from there, we'll then move on and we'll go in and we'll talk about some next steps. So let's start off initially by talking about some key concepts around continuous ATO. Can you help us understand a bit about what is continuous ATO and how does risk tie into this?
Yeah, let's talk about, like, again, what does ATO means. Before saying the continuous ATO, let's look at what ATO means. Like, we can open up that discussion a little bit. And it is about authority operates. That's the very basic definition. What really we are authorizing, what we are saying that in the context of authorizations, if we are building any systems, if we are building any application, I think that's kind of like okay for almost every domain. And it's not just the DoD specific, almost every organization, that organization are restricted to comply, a compliance perspective. Organization has some guidelines, or organization some policy, some sort of approval process, which is requiring to approve the system to be placed in the production environment. Like, we are not, what the production means, first of all, like, we were expecting that users will use that system or a software or components, what we are delivering, putting in an environment, so it will be live. And then the external users or internal users, so user will use that environment, use the system. Okay? That's kind of like the system that we are describing. What authorization means, that authorizing, we have to authorize that system is meeting the security requirements. Okay? It's not just the function requirements. We always look at the functional perspective of this. We will authorize that system with respect to the security requirements. So we have the right security controls that we implemented in place. And then we can really execute some specific mission based on the system, so we can deliver to the production environments, and users can use that system. As an organization, we are delivering a safe and secure system. So we have some mitigation strategy behind that system if something goes wrong. This is kind of a authorizing concept. Who are the authorizing the people? Who are the people? Like, let's look at we have the concept and we have the people are authorizing the systems. So we have three key personas, actually, which is authorizing officials. That person is responsible, or a team responsible. Or an organization may have information system secret officer, which is ISO. And then there is the secret assessors. So these are the groups are authorizing the systems. But let's go a little bit behind that, and we have also the team of people are building the systems. We're going to dive in today, and developers and system architects and security experts, security testers and QA are the stakeholders who are building the systems or also contributing to the process. But they're not approving, but somehow they're contributing to the process, contributing to the how things we are building. And also we have to call out the tools as well, which is kind of automation perspective. When we add in a continuous terminology on it, we are expecting to have a continuous approval, continuous assessments, continuous authorizing the things that we are building based on each delivery, based on each requirements, based on each security testing. So we have, or maybe the new business risk changes. So we can authorize the system as we are evolving, as we are delivering. We don't want to be like, wait last minute, look at what we have done for a 6 month, authorize it takes longer. With the concept of continuous authorization, we will like to authorize the system for any changes as kind of agile concept. That's the reason, like we're going to talk today as well, that's the reason we would like to use a DevSecOps concept with agile lean principles. We can establish that continuous perspective. So what the continuous ATO is based on what? So basically it's based on the NIST 800-37 risk management framework. That risk management framework is based on 800-53A, which is the security controls. So now that's the reason there is a connection between DoD or Department of Defense or federal agencies with an organization. If you look at most of the compliances, Altez, some of them already using the NIST 800-53 controls. Maybe they're grouping different way, like maybe say HTRUST or the SOX or other HIPAA, but these are the fundamental security controls. We're not kind of reinventing new controls. It's already exist. How we are packaging that controls put into the organization that need, which is RMF giving an umbrella, says define your security controls that is going to be relevant to your organizational risks. And then based on the risk-based decision, apply that concept automatically into your approval process. So I don't want to go in detail for RMF 800-37, but technically there's 6 steps in the RMF 800-37 says. Like you have to categorize, identify your system, understand what things you are building. You need to categorize the system with respect to security control. Select those controls applicable to the domain. Like we don't want to select some control if it isn't applicable to our technology we're using it. So that is a connection like in between. And based on the selected controls, we have to implement those controls. And then we have to really assess the control which is implemented. Is it correctly implemented? And is it run? Is it done? Is it already in a part of the system? So we can really see how it is implemented, these controls. Then we can authorize the system based on the control that we selected, based on the controls that we saw it's implemented. Then monitor those controls and how the system is behaving. So based on this control, based on the monitoring, we can go back and take a look again. That's what RMF 800-37 says. But it's not describing how section. Now we're going to talk about the how DevSecOps concept, how instruction we should automate those concepts in what level, in which level, what we should do, what type of security guardrails are, we can put into the continuous lifecycle perspective.
That's great. Wonderful. So I see that we've got the deck up. If we can move to slide number 6. So we just talked here really about ATO. What is this authority to operate? What is the role of an assessor and how this ties into to risk at this point? Let's move on to the next slide, and we can talk a little bit more. Here's an example of something that came out from the U.S. Air Force. And again, keeping in mind that what we are trying to do is architecturally, first of all, understand what the business problem is, and then we can architect accordingly. Now, when we consider each of the aspects from the perspective of the business, there are some clear desired outcomes. There will be certain drivers. There will be certain processes initiated on how we're going to achieve this. And there may be some barriers that we will need to overcome. This is a classic approach in considering what the business imperative is or what the agency is looking for, not just at a high level that we want to achieve continuous ATO, but really looking at it a little bit more granular and starting to break this down. And then moving forward and considering, even from an implementation standpoint, what might be some of the barriers. Hassan, can you talk a little bit about this need to go from the business objectives and trying to understand the processes that are the ideal state of what we want, please?
Yep, sure. It's really a very loaded question, by the way, Salt. It will take time to open up.
I'm sure.
Let's see how much we can do. And I think let's go back to the why we need to have a continuous perspective, why we need to have automations. Like if you look at this perspective, we would like to go and speed up the work that we would like to deliver it, right? Let's go to the next slide. So in the next slide, and we can see like our objectives as a business organization. We would like to deliver fast. We would like to deliver fast means like which is a speed of delivery that we are talking about. What the delivery means, with the business reason, there is a business value that we would like to deliver. If you look at Agile Manifesto's concept, look at the Lean concept, it's basically says you have to deliver a capability or a system that will have a value to the organizations. Like even when you put any stories into the requirements, like a definition of the story should have a value in it. So software or system building, it's always driven by the business value. That's kind of a current needs and which should be, right? If there is no value for the users, why we are delivering any capabilities? If there is no usefulness for the business impact, why we are delivering, why we are building? So if you look at perspective, and businesses deriving to deliver a capability as much as faster so we can meet the business needs, which is kind of a reason, which is our objective. When we look at this objective, but there is a difficulties because if you look at the security approval process, currently is a manual process, maybe a time-consuming process. So now it's kind of a delaying our approval process. And our objective is we have to reduce the time to authorize. That means we don't want to wait in the last minute to approve it because it will take time. Because now we would like to get a business value, but if there is a risk associated for the application that we are building, it will be difficult. Like what that means for risk association. Maybe we're not able to properly encrypt the data. So maybe we don't have a right segregation of the data. We don't have a right configuring or management with respect to known vulnerabilities. Maybe we don't have some dependency management list. So we have so much other things we can think about it. But if we discover that some security issues or some problems, it's going to impact our delivery. So we would like to reduce the time to authorize in things that we are building. So while we are building and authorizing the system, but we would like to increase security posture as well. Now that goes back to the ATO concept again. So overall, that's our driver that we would like to do, but there are a lot of barriers. Right? The barriers are it's manual process, first of all. The barriers are it's disconnected from different stakeholders, like architects are different, and then the developer are different, testers are different. Like we are using the kind of waterfall-ish mentality. I'm not saying waterfall papers, but waterfall-ish mentality. So maybe we don't have a probably right resources, maybe. We don't have a right tools that we selected. Maybe we just expecting tool will do everything for us, which I saw so many examples. Without having a right process in place, tools cannot solve our problem. So maybe you have that type of problem. Maybe you don't have some other issue, like maybe you don't have a right skill set people. Like another biggest challenge, actually, honestly, we are expecting developer writing a secure code, but developers are not trained in college to write a secure code. They don't, because they know how to write better code. They know how to develop an algorithms, but they don't know what the security vulnerabilities are. They're not trained that way because security is a living thing. So lack of knowledge is another barrier. There's a lot of barriers is in place. Okay?
Yeah,
so,
it's interesting. Sorry, I was just wanted to call out. It's interesting that
please.
you're bringing up these sort of architectural concepts, right? Lack of integration. If there's a lack of integration on the process side, it means architecturally we need to consider how we might be able to integrate these systems. You talk about data islands. Mm-hmm. We've got different teams working on different things, each focused on ATO, but in order to achieve continuous ATO, we need some way to build out this macro pipeline that facilitates all of these processes, and kind of integrates them all together. So it's interesting that you've just, in the discussion, we've naturally fallen into architectural concepts at this point. Sorry, please go on. There were other things you were going to say?
It's a great point, actually. That I was trying to go into the step back and look at how things we are building, which is our drivers. Our drivers are software development lifecycle perspective or system lifecycle perspective from beginning to end, which we have to think about that security is not a one-time job at the end that we are about to deliver it. It is a lifecycle perspective. Think about the lifecycle perspective. If you think about the lifecycle perspective, now we can take how much we can do, who are the stakeholders, then we can implement that RMF perspective into our lifecycle because it's not a one-time job. It is really requiring to be integrated into the life cycle. So when we are doing some delivery, we can increase the automation perspective, dropping a lot of manual steps, which is kind of automation related pieces that we should do. So these are the kind of our drivers that we should use. Like we have to look in a life cycle.
Yeah.
We have to look at the beginning of the system that we are building, Altes.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. You dropped a couple of words in there, Hassan. You dropped integration, you dropped in delivery. If we can go to the next slide, because now this is really what we're talking about. It's starting to build out all of these things together. Now, keep in mind, our goal is to construct an architecture.
Right.
But in so doing, we first need to understand the business problem. And as we delve successively deeper, now we're dealing with these CI/CD pipelines. Can you talk at this stage, what's the connection between a CI/CD pipeline in DevOps or DevSecOps as it pertains to risk and continuous ATO, please?
Sure, absolutely. I love this part, actually. It's kind of like my favorite thing that we discussed because, as I said, that RMF 800-37 is describing the overall process, right? Even though if anybody read that document, and you will see a lot of continuous terminology, it's already in the document. But how can we achieve that continuous concept? It is requiring some right processes, right process, right infrastructure, right people, which is the three elements. I mean, it looks like a classical term, but it's still valid. Like, which is requiring a good platform. Because if you can automate some of the controls, you need to have a platform. What the platform means, platform is we are building a system. Platform has the infrastructure, platform as a service and some services that is really helping us build up the overall system that we are working on. Like in this slide, and all the GUCs are basically platform for us. That platform has the continuous integration in it. That platform has a continuous delivery concept, code review, and testings. So like we can dive into each of the specifically, which is basically overall DevSecOps environment. If you would like automate some of the process, and then we have to use the integration concept. We got to integrate it with the things that we are building. Then we can orchestrate some other test cases or the pre-built case. So let's go into a little bit detail and lower into the continuous integration perspective. So integration is going to be really getting the code from various developers, various team members. It may be more than once. By the way, this is just the one screen as the maybe diecast of one of the pipeline perspective. As an organization, we will have hundreds of pipeline. We will have hundreds of continuous integration, continuous delivery pipeline based on the system that we are building or the system components that we are building. So we really start from the things that we are building, a small application with small services. Then also the bubbling up to the higher level, we may have multiple pipelines for its overall systems. Then we can upstream into the continuous pipeline perspective, adding into the higher and higher, so we can really merge more integration perspective. So typically, what we have done as an organization, as the community, we always upstream all the artifacts, and when we merge artifacts in a bigger picture in the system, like we are maybe like getting multiple components. Let's say we are building a web application. That web application may have hundreds of services in it, right? So we have to collect all the services, integrate those into the single web application, or maybe multiple services are running on it. So when you try to integrate in a late, and when you look at the security perspective, it's too late. So now we're going to down. So let's go to integration perspective. Integration is going to be getting the code from the various repositories, various developer, integrating and to check some further testing, which we do typically. So there are 3 steps integration. One is the pre-build steps that we would like to do. Pre-build steps are static analysis specific, look at the code perspective. This is the foundational concept of looking what the security controllers are that we're supposed to do at the beginning. Now we can verify in the code perspective, which is a static analysis we have to do as a pre-build. We build artifacts. Now artifacts is ready, which is artifacts can be executables, can be binaries. Then we look at some other test cases, maybe interactive application security testing, you might be doing it, maybe the dynamic analysis security testing test. You may have further security testing you will do. So which is kind of like integration is orchestrating the test pre and after the build. Now, this is going to be part of our build steps, which is on every changes. But that's what the continuous comes from. Like as we have been in integration for years, but we never do the continuous concept, right? What the continuous is telling us, every changes developer makes in the code repositories, let's trigger all this tests automatically. Then we can get artifacts. We're going to come to artifacts later on. Then we can build up a continuous concept. And other things I would like to open up here, Altaz, we really think about in a system or software engineering principles. So in the software engineering concept, an agile or DevSecOps is not against the dropping the software engineering lifecycle. As you can see on the slide, we always have a request. We need to know what things we are building. It's not a waterfall. It's a life cycle. It's an SDLC. We have to know what things we are building, which is our business, which is our value. If you look at agile, the techniques like a Scrum or Kanban, all of them describing what is the value that we are bringing, which is the first steps, okay? Which is when we are building the requirements, we are building something to the users, there is a value associated. That's the reason we are building. Now, look at the RMF thinking, we have to select what system that we are building, which is the first steps, so that there's a way we can integrate in the security perspective. Then when we look at the requirements, we are describing what the requirements are in the system that we are building, which is the another steps. In the requirements, and we will discuss more again, we should have all the security controls and security requirements as part of our requirements as well. Now, when we design the systems, we're going to design the systems based on the security requirement that we have. We can go to design and develop and testing. Regardless of any system, regardless of any software writing, we always have these steps in our hand. You might be using agile practices, Scrum or Kanban. You may be using waterfall still. Doesn't matter. Still, you have carry out. But only differences with DevSecOps concept, we are doing all this work in a time box, which is our sprint. Maybe you're doing a 2-week sprint, maybe you're doing a 3-week sprint. Based on the sprint, based on the duration, we all these activities.
Yeah.
So now it's really challenging, right, Altes? So we go to challenging shortly.
Absolutely. This is really important. I think at this point, if we can throw up the first poll, and while folks are answering that, I think it's important to realize that we are continuing on this journey of agility. And when we start to get into DevOps and DevSecOps, the thought is we are trying to achieve a continuous everything type of model. So we have continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous compliance, continuous security. And it's these concepts that really help us when we look at how we could go in and achieve this continuous ATO that we're looking for. We know that it is something from an agency perspective that is important. Historically, it's been a slow process, but given some of the techniques that we've seen within the DevOps communities around CI and CD, can we leverage that now to help us to manage both the risk and the ATO process itself? If we can go on to the next slide here, I'd like to delve a little bit deeper now. So we spoke really at a high level, and we looked at, okay, we've got to have CI, we've got to have CD, we've got to put all these things together. But eventually, we're going to have to select a category or set of categories of tools to help us to bring all of this now together. There's no shortage of these tools. They do exist, but we really are looking at this point around what are the specific categories that we should be bringing together. So Hassan, can you talk a little bit? I know in the previous slide, you started to talk about static code analysis, and you started to talk about how we can go in and bring things together from a testing perspective. But now let's get concrete at this point. Mm-hmm. How do we fundamentally start to construct this architecture that will facilitate continuous ATO for us?
Yep. Probably let's go to the next slide, and then we're going to come back this one again.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, so let's start from here.
Mm-hmm.
So, as we said, we have to look at a software lifecycle perspective from beginning to end. When we look at this perspective, we need a planning tools. We need a basic, kind of like a system that we would like to get the requirements. We can really keep track of what system that we are building. And then we need to have build mechanisms, which is the integration component. So But all these things should be connected to the version control, should be in the middle. So version control is we call it as a source of truth. So we are bringing every communication or every creation or every write-up with respect to the configuration or documentation or anything into the level of developers. The biggest problem that we had it so far in the community, we are speaking the same language when it comes to the software lifecycle perspective. Architects are talking a different way with the developers, and then developer has its own way of writing the code. And then we look at the documentation, that how we are creating a documentation for the systems, or if you look at how the QA and testers are doing test cases, all are disconnected because they were using a different repositories. So now what we should do, we have to bring up everything to the same repositories as the source control, that we can keep the source of truth over there. That is just not the code, it's also requiring a configuration management perspective as well. Like what things we are building, what is the reason we are changing, and then what is the purpose of change we do, what's the reasoning behind it, and then we can initiate other type of automated creations like testing and integration. So starting from the repositories, now we are really defining as a developer what things that we are building, which is issue tracking system. Right? We can put the planning components of it, which is about the security requirements, which is the first step in the RMF perspective. Define your security control should be part of our issue tracking system. Now, we had the code, which is repositories. We have other artifacts, which is the platform that we described at the beginning, like platform things can be as the infrastructure pieces that we are working on it. It's connected to your build server, which is your continuous integration server, that will trigger various other testing. In the process, we have to do pre-build and post-build stuff that we will do, so which is deep diving in other components as well. So overall, look at this perspective, all the tools are integrated each other. That is a platform. If the tools are not integrated, it's becoming a silo. When we talk about automation, automation is requiring an integration each of the tools. If I cannot initiate any build scripts for any changes in the repositories, it's not the automation, it's not the DevSecOps. You cannot automate the ATO approval. If you're not, as an organization, if you're not putting any artifacts into the same repositories, now how your security folks will look at what the changes are. Because as an SSRs, we're asking so much artifacts. If your system is not able to generate the report from every test result that you do as part of static or dynamic analysis, if it is not translating or not sharing with other stakeholders, including the security folks, which is a communication system. Like I can go as an example, even though I have a quick test with my students, I'll test. And at the 800-53 with my students, it was about 453 pages. It's a lot. Said, can you guys let me know which security controls? Everybody was, oh my goodness, too much. Yeah, that's true. So there should be an empathy. As a security folks, we just saying that you have to comply all these controllers, you have to comply 800-53 or the HTRAS or the SOAX or HIPAA. Do we really have an idea how much developer they have a time to do that? They don't. Because giving that documentation in a bigger picture, like everything else, without describing what they can do in their code, they have no time to read it. Another interesting that I would like to share as well, if you look at most of the pen testing result we are generating as a result of test analysis or pen testing result, it's basically 50 pages, sometimes 100 pages. Then when you give the documentation to the users as an email, and there's no time for them to read it. Because we never able to supply at a continuous perspective of the feedback mechanisms. That is requiring a build and then sharing the result immediately with the stakeholder to the communication system. Let's go back to the previous slide, Alta, so we can dive into each of the tools. So if you look at here, and then as we're describing what the version control system does for us, and it is basically managing the controls, managing the changes, and it's the first step on the configuration management perspective. You may use the CMDB tools, that's fine, or you can use the repositories to keep track of your changes. And if I know what things I'm changing, if I know I have a track of the code systems, I can really see what the controls applicable are for this component. And then continuous integration system, as we discussed, it is merging. You may use the Bamboo, you may use other planning tool or the build tools like a Jenkins or Travis. So it really doesn't matter which tools are you selecting, but the key point is here, you have to integrate those tools for specific purposes. Then we look at the static analysis tool, like a source code analysis, an example. And then we need to analyze the code, which without executing. What the SEST does, looking for known vulnerabilities based on the CWs, based on the weakness of that language specific. It can be C++, it can be Java, it can be Python, it can be PHP. If we know a common vulnerabilities specific that language, and statistically, we can eliminate 50% of security problem by just looking for the code practices at the beginning. It's so valuable. We may use a static analysis in the build process. We may use the code review perspective. We can look at the code, and then based on what the CW says, we can really build up the system. Again, if you look at what the vulnerability means, vulnerability is based on the defect. And defect is based on two things. And either the design-related problems we may have a bug in the system. So we can capture any design-related problems by analyzing the static analysis code right in that perspective. Now the question is like, how are we going to connect a static analysis into our business? Do we have to look at every CWs that we are building in the code, or do we have to look at what the appropriate security requirements are for us that we have to apply it? That is the key point, actually. That's the reason, like, we need to have an application security requirements, threat modeling platform, so we can keep track what the security controllers are we are agreed on, what the security requirements are. That's the biggest problem, because we never really have a good relationship with the security requirements with the security testing. And then, like, we're just looking for the result of the Sonar Cube or various static analysis tools. Then based on the high, low, medium, we're just accepting risk. But what is the driver for us to accept the risk? What is the reason we are looking for high, low, medium? It may be high, low, medium, that's okay for the tools, but what is our high, low, medium organizations? That's what RMF actually says. Like, you have to say, you have to look at your controls, you have to look at what is important in your domain, you can define those. So we need to have a good security requirements tool so we can keep track the changes, like SDLM as an example. We can put into the requirements and then track what the requirements are, verify those requirements as part of the static analysis, as part of the test analysis, as part of our dependency check. We can look at what the requirements are, and then how we are building, and then we can go to the approval process. So each of these activities also, Altez, it is generating a lot of data for us. So, I mean, I can deep dive more, but any questions?
Yeah. So I just wanted to call out, so we did get the results from the survey around maturity, and we found that roughly 16.7% said yes, they consider themselves mature. About 40% said no, and about 45% roughly said partial. So it's skewed, at least for this audience, seems to be skewed mostly towards partial or no in terms of their level of maturity. So hopefully this type of a discussion will help you better understand how you can construct a roadmap. And we will get eventually to some next steps on how you can achieve that. But this is making sure that the purpose of an architecture is really to align with that business need ultimately. We also got some questions coming in around whether folks can get a copy of this presentation of the slides. Absolutely. By all means, more than happy to share this information. Please continue to keep the questions, comments coming in. Happy to steer this, as we go through this as well. If we just move ahead now and go to slide number 11, so a couple of slides down. At the end of the day, when we put these pipelines together, Hassan, now we're starting to talk about the idea that it's not just about having one single CI/CD pipeline, but we've got multiple pipelines, each having multiple stakeholders with their own perspective on this. So we need people who need to understand what's happening from a risk perspective. Others need to understand what's happening from a delivery standpoint. And now what emerges is this concept of a software factory. So can you talk about the connection between a software factory and continuous ATO and risk management, please?
Yes, absolutely. So in other things in the continuous ATO concept, we said there are three components. One is authorizing the platform. The platform thinks that we are building the system, we are building the software, which is kind of a middle section and has all the cogs in it. So in the software factory, it consists of multiple software delivery pipelines. You may have multiple of them. Depends on the technology, depends on the language, depends on the system. You may have a .NET application you might be building. You may have different team foundation server based on the pipeline. If you are building maybe a web application, probably you may have a Jenkins-based pipeline that's kind of a service running on it. You may have a completely containerized pipeline you might be building using Kubernetes and Docker. So it really depends on your technology choice. You have hundreds of pipeline. That pipeline is constructed in a software factory that we are building various components in the single, bigger software environment that we may have multiple platforms running on it. So the platform is the foundational place that we have to make sure that our platform is secure. Okay, it's not just looking for the security controllers only. So security controllers and application specific, but how things we are building is also important, like a dependencies. If we know our dependency, if we have a good track of our dependencies, beyond ALTS, we are solving so much security problem by knowing our dependencies. Like I just give an example again with my students. If you look at the Hello World application that we are writing in the C++ versus writing Hello World application web environment, the C++ just a line of code, but we are compiling, which we know the operating system. We have operating system, we compile the code, we write the code, probably 3 layers. But when you are building a Hello World application using a Django framework as a web application, it's about 25 steps. Because we have an operating systems, we have web services, we have the frameworks, we have the language dependencies. So now writing code seems much easier, but dependencies behind this and complexity is a lot. So if you are able to approve or understand what is the environment that we are constructed in our build process and our dependencies, our libraries. So if you secure that environment, understand all the dependencies, all the framework, that if you know in advance, if you know our dependent, if you know about the configuration in advance, if you know that, which is technically we are solving most 80% of problem. Because we know it's not really changing a lot. Like your framework is the framework, we're not changing a frame. When you decide to have a Django framework, you just keep it in the same framework. As a developer, we're just adding in new changes in the code. We're not changing framework. Same as .NET framework. Same as be using some container. So if you really approve the platform, then we're approving like almost 80% of the roles.
Yeah. So we end up with this. Sorry, we end up with this sort of layered architecture is what you're describing. Right. Sorry, please go ahead.
Yeah. Which is the kind of like platform pieces that we spoke so far. Now the next step is the process. If you look at the screen, that there's a process is basically it's a continuous feedback, continuous build. Like we would like to have a continuous integration concept. We would like to have a continuous monitoring concept. Why we need a continuous integration? Because we have to build every changes. That has to be into the repository management. We can build up, we can do the certain testing. As again, each steps are creating artifacts for us. If you have a continuous integration, we have a build result. We have a test result. So each of these steps as the process-wise creating an artifacts for us, that artifacts should be shared with the stakeholders, which is AO, as we said at the beginning, which is security folks at the beginning. How we are sharing the result with the build result and developers, we can collect that result and build up the package that will go to the AO assessors as well. But it's so much like, we are saying we have to generate that, but we don't want to be really creating a email mechanisms to build up so much output from each of the system that will go in person, look at all the artifacts and then try to read it. There's no time. Now we need to have a monitoring system. So monitoring, which is the kind of a requirement from RMF perspective, we should have a monitoring. What the monitoring is going to telling us, what's our status with respect to the static analysis that we did. What's our status for the build? What is our status with respect to security requirements? Where we are into the approval, where we are into the deployment. So we can really collect a lot of metrics and data, visualize it in a dashboard, and ideally assessors will see, yes, we have requirements that we listed as part of feature request. Yes, we have done the certain security testing as a part of CI. Yes, we have a continuous checklist based on dependencies on before the delivery, maybe using a container, maybe using other the environment, so we verify all the dependencies. So we see that has been done as verified in a dashboard, then assessors probably will approve changes much quicker because they see the progress, they see the outputs. Again, yep. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's interesting. No, I was going to say this is because now this brings up some other questions I would like to do a deeper dive on. Before we do that, maybe we can throw up the second poll, because now we're starting to get into implementation issues, right? What are some of the challenges that folks are having when they consider some of these concepts that we're talking about? And while that poll is being answered, Hassan, I'd like to ask you, as we scale out these pipelines, we end up with these constructs like pipeline of pipelines type of thing, where things integrate together. It's no longer just about looking at the technical teams, but it's expanding this to look at what the other teams are doing as well, where we've got in sort of the physical world, we've got these processes that we're executing, but we're essentially digitizing these as we construct our pipelines. So can you talk a bit about the pipeline of pipelines concept as we scale this out to build a factory and start to inject in compliance and risk and some of these other things into the factory?
Right, absolutely, Altes. So the one concept is we can build out the infrastructure pieces in a pipeline of compliance. Like we can keep the similar characteristics of the pipeline, and then using the base images, like we can stand up another one is, let's say we can use the containerized version of the GitLab or the build server, and then we can scale up using the same base images, creating another instance of the pipeline to serve ours. We are using the same sources. If we approve the libraries and the tools at the beginning, then we don't reapprove again, which is kind of goes back to scalability perspective. Another one is we need to have a process. So it's basically ATO is, as I said, three elements. One is the platform perspective. The other one is authorizing the process perspective. So we should have an organization, same process. Like we can, if we have a good process, if everybody's agreed on it, if everybody's following, then we technically are some a lot of problems.
Yes.
Because like we can use different tools and techniques, but we have a same process. Like same process means we should have a continuous feedback. We should have a continuous integration concept. If your developer are not really committing the code in a sprint basis, you cannot achieve the continuous concept. If your security architects, if your risk teams are not putting the security requirements into the requirements phase, this is a process related technically. You cannot achieve the requirements with respect to the RMF. If your tester is not really testing the system based on the security requirements, within a process, you're not achieving the quality of testing with respect to the system that we are building, right?
Yeah. It's interesting because now what we're essentially doing is as we construct the pipelines, these pipelines serve as guardrails. When we construct our development across these pipelines, as long as it goes through these pipelines, we will radiate the necessary information to help us achieve the continuous ATO. So we started off talking about the business need. Then we talked about the different components that we can use to help from an architecture standpoint. Then we refined that to talk about a single pipeline. And now we've moved on to this concept of a software factory. But ultimately, everything is working synchronously with these cogs, as you described, to help emanate this information out there so that people can start to make informed decisions. Now, when we bring this stuff out, does that mean that from a pipeline standpoint, just as you would see in a typical factory, if there's some problem with quality, you can stop the pipeline, and everybody swarms to solve the problem, and then we move on. Is that the intent when we construct these software factories, that if something is outside of the realm or within the context of a certain risk threshold, that we stop it from being deployed? Is that part of managing the risk?
That's exactly. So we define the requirement, we define the risk. That is the first step in RMF. If you remember, to identify the system, select the controls. This is based on the risk. How we are selecting the controls based on the risk that we're expecting from the system. Who is really selecting the controls? And the security folks or the risk management team, they know what the risks are for the specific application. So risks, there's actually two elements of the risk. One is the business-related risk, other technical risk. So as we said at the beginning, we are delivering any value to the users, which is our business. So what the risks are, you may say my system is going to be down for a while. You may say my system is going to get a compromise, and then if it is compromised, and then my name will be in the market, so I'm going to use my reputation, basically. I may use the market share, probably. These are the business risks. So what is really derived to use to put in the business risk because of technical problem? Maybe your system is going to be down because of you have some vulnerabilities in your web application that you have, which is the connection. So each of the controllers has the business impact, technically, if you look at that. Like, if you have a good analysis, if you don't really patch your systems timely, if you don't have mechanisms to be readiness for any deployments as automated fashion, and then your system is going to be down because you're doing manually. If your system is going to down, so you're losing a market share. This is the connections between. So we don't really establish that connection. We are looking for to establish that connection based on the risk level. We can put a technical risk on top of it and see how much we can tolerate it. We can find the balance out of it. So we can really put the control. And then we can monitor those. Like if we have infinite time and budget, we can build up a secure system, but we don't have it. Realistically, we don't have a time. We don't have an infinite budget. So now we have to find the balance of what is the requirements that we would like to do based on the value, what appropriate security controllers are. So we can really put into the system, and then we can really put in place. So you have another things, Altez. I know we're running out of time, but I would like also talk about the team perspective. You said the team, because if we put the right processes, right the team, which is knowledge pieces and culture, and we can scale any tool's perspective. But if you put our requirements and expectation in the tools, if tool is really band-aid, it is bending our process and our team, we are becoming a captive of the tools we cannot scale up. We would like to scale up the knowledge. We would like to scale up the institutional information. We should do that. Because if you cannot get a mindset of security thinking with the developers and business and managerial, we cannot scale up the tools. Tool is easy. You can throw many licensing, many users, and many resources. But end of the day, developers are building the code. We have to really train the developers. We have to train our business analysts to think about the security perspective. We have to train our management. They can put time and money to put into the security knowledge in the developers. Like we have I'm sure part of the survey we have done every year. And the survey says every developer believes security is important, but the 99% of developers are saying that we don't have enough time put into it. Why? Because we never planned the time with them. We never really put the team to learning. But if organizations are using more DevSecOps concept or automation, and then we see good elements, people are learning. We would like people to learn more because you are taking a lot of manual steps from the team, and they are learning, which is another survey we find out this year as well, 2020, last year actually, 2020 DevSecOps survey, we find out that organizations are doing more e-learning, about 85%, or e-learning if they have a good DevSecOps infrastructures in place. See how much automation is impacting product, which is the team is important, Altez.
It's really interesting that you bring that up, and we look at the survey results. If we can even go to the next slide here, talking really about the key issues here being automation, looking at it from a compliance standpoint, looking at the culture. These are all really important. So when we look at that, it's important, from a next steps perspective, look at this in terms of assessing your current state. perhaps the ATO model today is reactive. You don't have continuous ATO. It's taking a really long time. And the operations are largely siloed between DevOps and security and risk teams. And we're really looking at different systems. The future state of where we would like to go would be continuous ATO with cross-functional security. We've got feedback loops coming in. And between the current and future state, we have a gap. So let's clearly articulate what that gap is. It may be that we need new competencies. We might need a new integrated architecture. We might need to do knowledge sharing, as Hassan, you described. We might have the need for having platforms that integrate some of these data islands that we've got. And then as we consider this change gap, we move forward and consider, all right, so what are the barriers to us closing this gap? It might be a lack of expertise, in which case training becomes important. It might be that there's no time available, so we need to help to reprioritize where this fits into the overall mandate around continuous ATO. We might have unique processes, and so we've got different pipelines that don't necessarily integrate well together. How do we bring these together? And finally, when we look at the final column, if we understand these barriers, what are the change activities that we will put in place to help address these barriers? It might be that we have certain transformation and disruption strategies, dealing with things like change management, training, joint strategy sessions that we put together. We might even engage in a pilot project. Let's do a proof of concept. Let's run it through. Let's try to achieve a reduction in that ATO time that we've got today to help us move forward. And this is ultimately, as we ground this discussion, it's really about making sure that whatever architecture we produce is intended to drive that business need. So these change activities are there to address the barriers to change, which inhibit us from trying to achieve the continuous ATO. With that, I'd like to basically go to the next slide. And I think at this point, if I could hand it over to our platform team, if you can talk about some upcoming webinars, and we'll just take it from there. Thank you.
Well, thank you both, Altaz and Hassan, for an absolutely fascinating look at a very, very complex landscape. We do have one more poll to ask our attendees, which I'll ask our engineer to publish out now. And we are just about at the end of the time that we have for this webinar. On behalf of our attendees and AFCEA's Signal Media, Altaz and Hassan, I really want to offer our thanks for spot-on discussion and very energizing questions too. Big thank you to our attendees as well. For any questions that have gone unanswered, the team at Security Compass will follow up with you directly offline. If you are interested in more from Security Compass, please join them on August 26th for their webinar on enabling continuous ATO in the US federal government with SD elements. Registration for that webinar can be found at www.securitycompass.com. You can revisit this webinar on demand anytime you like, as well as view the recorded versions of previous Signal Media webinars on AFCEA's Signal Media website at www.afcea.org/signal/webinar. Altaz, Hassan, unless there's anything else, I believe we can wrap it up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thanks, Altaz. It was a pleasure to talk with you.
Terrific. Well, that concludes our Signal Media webinar. Thanks again, everybody, for your participation, and have a very good rest of your day.